we're going into a little more of the academic side of this program, which we sometimes talk to people who are very high up in the ranks of their study and where they've placed themselves, parapsychologists, psychologists, various workers. But we've never talked to anybody who has quite the distinctions that our next guest has with reference to tarot cards. Christine Payne-Towler, her website, tarotuniversity.com. She joins us this evening. Christine, welcome to the program. How are you tonight?
I'm wonderful, Jeff, and I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. Now, I'll be honest. I have several decks of tarot cards. I love them. I utilize them. I'm a worker of the tarot. I also use other oracle decks, I guess you could call them, that aren't as closely related to tarot. But the tarot itself, it's something that has such a level of attraction to most people, but also in some cases a level of fear. And you've been researching and working with the tarot for how long now? How did you originally find yourself in this world, and what was your original sort of instance that happened with the tarot for you, Christine?
Well, I had already been awakened to trance reading and direct energy work because of a fortuitous class I took in the Bay Area before I went off to college. So I was walking around in what was a kind of a shamanically psychedelic universe anyway. And it was Christmas. I was looking for presents to take home for my family. I walked into a used bookstore, and I must have stumbled onto a cache of Masonic tarot resources from somebody's grandfather who died, and they didn't know what to do with his library. And so I bought 2 volumes that turned out to be thunderous in terms of the revelations they were making about the internal structures of tarot. And then I also ended up bringing home a deck called the C.C. Zane, or Sacred Tarot, Sacred Tarot by C.C. Zane, which is a black and white Egyptian-style deck that follows in the kind of teachings you would find among the Masons in the French circles from the late 1700s through the 1800s. So before the modern burst of creativity of all the English-style decks.
Now, and there, of course, there are several, if not hundreds, of decks that are out there. Everything from zombie decks to Crowley decks to decks that are. I understand. I think it's Lisa Frank is her name. She designed some of the cutesy little stickers and things from the early '90s that '90s kids will remember getting in school. There's now a Lisa Frank tarot that's out there with like unicorns and kittens and.
Yeah, very silly. Some of it's extremely sketchy, or just enjoyable in an artsy sense.
How many of those decks are closely related to what the core true tarot should be, in your opinion?
Well, the core tarot is what we inherited from the Renaissance, and it accumulated up across the 1400s and kind of got its firming up structural elements at the beginning of the 1500s. So you see this sequence of 22 what are called trumps. So we see them as icons. They represent very strong symbols that have congregated a lot of energy, like the emperor, the devil, the chariot, the high priestess, things that the hermit. They represent ideas in multiple religions, ideas that have been rendered down into potent symbols, like the astrology symbols, but they're a little freer than that. You actually see a full artistic presentation as opposed to a glyph. But these things are all over the cathedrals in Europe. They're all through the tapestries, the early hand-illustrated manuscripts. And when printing came to Europe, they started being printed out into these playing card decks. So we got the 4-suited deck, the 52-card playing card deck that we think of now. We got that from North Africa and the Middle East. It was actually an Islamic tool for gaming, but it was already set up to be coordinated to astrology and Kabbalah and sacred numerology. Just the form of it is very distinctly enumerated, exactly like these arts and sciences. So it is a natural calculating machine. But then when it got to Europe, these 22 extra ideas got added, which turn out to be associated with the Hebrew alphabet and the other magical alphabets of Europe, from the Druidic alphabet through, the different codes and ciphers that the Masons used to try and conceal what they were talking about. But this 22 set of extra non-suited cards is specific to Europe. That is the European connection that makes it tarot. Also, when they came in from southern North Africa through Italy and Spain, these first card decks, they did not have drawings. They were all beautiful, like Islamic mosaics and writing, but there was no art on them. No, I shouldn't say that. There's no figurative art on them. And when they got to Europe, suddenly there were faces to go with the names, and then there were queens that were added, and then finally the trumps were added.
There's a lot to be said for the way that tarot can be interpreted. As a reader, do you find yourself sort of playing fast and loose outside the lines of what the cards are actually supposed to mean, or do you find yourself sticking sort of closely to what the inherent meaning of the Hermit or the Wheel or the Sun is in the original decks? Christine, where did you fall from?
There was never an original manual. So what we have is the cumulative testimony of history as these archetypes come forward to us. For example, there's a set of friezes that was just found, artistic paintings on a set of Roman walls that look like the prototypes of the trumps. And in the, or major arcana is another thing they're called, this 22 set. In the works of the philosopher Boethius in the 4th century, he wrote a book called The Consolation of Philosophy, and he, one by one, moves through all these, almost all of them, in his thinking about life and death, because he's sentenced to life in his 40s. He's sentenced to death in his 40s, and he has a year to serve before the execution. Very highly educated Roman senatorial type, but a little young to be dying, so he's going through his whole life of studies trying to look for consolation through the philosophy that he studied, and he calls up every one of these archetypes from chapter to chapter. So you can really see these things coming to us through history, but for the first time they are pictured in a sequential set that starts on the human plane and moves up through, from the individual life with the first 7 trumps, and then through the social life with the second 7 trumps, and then finally the spiritual life with the third 7. And the figure that wraps it all up is the Fool, which is really the soul, traveling through the world, trying on all these costumes, experiencing all these circumstances, and hopefully learning something.
We are speaking live right now with Christine Payne-Towler from TarotUniversity.com. We're discussing tarot here live on Paranormal. Christine, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk a little bit more about the structure of the tarot universe here on Paranormal, only on News Talk 980 CJME and News Talk 650 CKOM. Christine Payne-Towler is a scholar of the tarot, and she joins us here tonight live. Now, Christine, the structure, the universe of the tarot, what is the card that you would say? Now, you had sort of said earlier that the Fool was like the soul of the tarot. Would that be the card that you would identify as sort of being the center of the tarot universe, in your opinion?
Well, people have speculated 17 different ways from Sunday how to understand things. The Fool was numbered 0. He got his appellation very late. He was always at the end of the trump sequence, and the Magus was given the number 1, and then all of the trumps followed from that, and the Fool ended it. And one of the presenters who carried it over from the 1900s to the 20th century was Oswald Wirth. And whenever he would show the trump list, he'd actually give this curve diagram where the trumps were made into a circle, these major arcana, 22 cards, and the Fool is the end of the end and the beginning before the beginning. So the card number 21 is behind him, card number 1 is in front of him. So that's one of the ways in which he becomes the glue that holds the sequence together, the soul without the body. And actually, when I was working, trying to dig my way backwards through these archetypes to get away from the pollution of modern ideas, one of the things I ran into was the idea of the fool for God. St. Francis and the spiritual Franciscans, and then the Beguines and Begards. They were a movement of spiritual people who didn't want to take oaths and join any order, but they wanted to live in a holy way like St. Francis, transparent to nature and transparent to God. And so very much a shamanic and clairvoyant state. That is what they were aspiring to in emulation of their patron saint. So that whole group would see the Fool card as the mendicant, the person who, with the begging bowl or the pilgrim's shell, would just travel from spot to spot, being taken care of by the circumstance. So it's an apt metaphor for what the soul lives through as it moves from body to body, from ego to ego, or from stage to stage of a person's life, because now that we're in the 21st century and we're living in such a speeded up reality, and with all these extra media and stuff, people are now living multiple lifetimes in one body, where we might used to repeat ourselves several lifetimes just to get one lesson. Now it's almost like every decade we have to reinvent ourselves and have an entirely new set of identifications. So that fool can be the common denominator between this stage and that stage of a soul's evolution.
And of course, the interpretation of the card varies, in my opinion, directly from the context in which the card fits into the given question, and the other cards around it. I've often looked at tarot as sort of letters of the alphabet, in that they don't really mean a lot by themselves, but when you see them positioned next to other cards, that's when they really start to sort of evoke and bring forward their meaning. But the interpretation of the Fool at its sort of face value, as that of sort of folly and inexperience and sort of this naivete, do you find that a lot of the cards, the way that you interpret them, are sort of carrying the idea of the archetype, or do you blend more of your own personal story into them, Christine?
I really, as a historian, want to pull up what I think the people at the time were talking about when they were handling these ideas and writing about them, whether in the context of tarot or not. So first, my grounding, my roots are down in those historical studies, but I don't find any conflict between trying to strictly hold to what you can prove historically and driving as much creativity and imagination through those rules as possible. I'm really more of an and person, and I think it's because I have an extremely shamanic body, which was an accident of birth that I obviously chose, and so before I ever came into any contact with the tarot, much less any scholarly point of view about it, I was already walking around seeing things and perceiving things and being extremely inconvenient in my family, for example, by saying the one thing that everybody didn't want said, or by, always taking the lid off of something that people were trying to keep down. I just have had a certain kind of quality about me that makes things pop open and show me things that other people weren't seeing. So
you've been the spark and the catalyst for many things, in essence.
Just even if I'm not, even if I can't get any effect in the world around me, I'm seeing things. And so, when I was young, I didn't really understand this quirk in my nervous system. I didn't really know. I thought other people had these experiences too. It took me a long time to keep checking with people and find out, no, that's not happening for them at all. So, it was confusing and difficult when I was younger. When I got older, then I realized, oh my God, look at this. There's all this political stuff that I've never noticed. I really was the fool, because when you have a lot of inner information coming at you at the same time as the outer information that society says is what is true, you are often caught in the games that societies play in order to cover up their secrets. So individuals as well as cultures have these taboos, and I'm sure you understand this as a shamanic type yourself, that, you have the actual thing that everybody agrees is true, but around it is this shimmering field of possibility, And each different person sees a different part of that field of possibilities. So we might use the same noun for a thing, but our sense of the verb, what it's doing, could be completely different, or where it's going, or what it means. Each person is doing that translation themselves, even if they're looking at what we consensusly call the same thing. So there's this hall of mirrors effect, which took me a long time to sort out what is the data from the thing itself, what is the reflected data from all the personalities and opinions, and then, oh, by the way, what is my opinion about this? So I think really I became a scholar in order to shape my opinions so that I could then trust my own judgment not to be over-affected by the play of shadows of the current body of opinion, that's out there in the mass mind.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant. The way that tarot has sort of ingrained itself in popular culture for me is so fascinating because you see tarot everywhere. You really truly do, and even something as simple as the sort of the trope that's sometimes used of the old fortune teller in the dusty caravan and the death card. Coming up. And you've probably heard this, to no end. But when we come back, let's talk a little bit about the fear and the fever around the death card and what it actually means. 'Cause it instills fear in people to look at that card sometimes. And, of course, you and I, we know what the card means and what it brings forth. But let's educate and let's look at a little bit further the true meaning of the death card. This is Paranormal. We're speaking with Christine Payne-Towler of TarotUniversity.com, and you're listening to News Talk 980 CJME and News Talk 650 CKOM. Christine Payne-Towler, TarotUniversity.com. Now, Christine, you are a scholar of the tarot. Let's toss some of the ideas of tarot out the window, since that's a little bit of what we like to do on this show. We say take everything that you've known and toss it out the window because we bring forth new ideas, new ways of thinking about things. The death card, Christine. Let's talk about that briefly. It's probably one of the most dreaded cards in the deck, but it's, I think, probably the most understood. Where's all the fear stem from with relation to the death card, in your opinion?
Well, there's a couple layers. First of all, the body, which is our mortal part, does not like to be reminded that the clock is ticking. So right away, you get the word death, and people go right back, their eyes go up in their head, and they fall backwards into their own memories of loss and grief and endings. So there's that. You can't stop it because you're throwing the cards down, and as soon as the card goes down, the person starts to ramify, right? They start to have all the feelings of, oh, my God, and what does that mean, and whoa. So that and the devil, actually quite a few of the cards can be quite spooky when they come up, because when you hear your own thoughts, or you see your own thoughts falling in front of you on a random toss of the cards, any card can give you goosebumps when that happens. Right?
Yeah.
A phenomenon of tarot,
of course,
that it makes such an amazing mirror of the person, and I think it's because the person who shuffles is the magnet. The cards are like little iron filings, and they just go right into the vibratory pattern of the person who shuffles. So it's just a simple magnetic event, but we forget to think that way, and so, of course, it looks like magic, and it stimulates all kinds of, awe and dread and fear and concern. So, but the death in particular, the next thing that people see, they see a skeleton with a big scythe used for cutting grain at the end of the fall, and this skeleton is walking through the world of the living, and harvesting those, row after row of this living grain. And the old John Barleycorn model, that in order to have your next year's alcohol, you're going to have to take John Barleycorn down and put him through all those horrible changes. That's a completely alchemical idea. The reaping of the grain leads to the death of the old, that then becomes the sprouting and giving forth of either nutrition or inspiration or the future field of grain. So we're the alchemist or the farmer or the person who is putting the reaped substance through these changes. Now that's in the persona of the walking skeleton. That's the shaman. when he shows himself in his energy body, able to take the individual soul through an initiation where they are literally stripped of their body and they're forced to experience themselves as dead. And every initiatory society all around the world, for the sake of creating priests and creating, leaders in the spiritual life of the tribe, they always put a candidate through a major test. And, the natives in your land and mine would use the metaphor of killing you, breaking you apart, stripping the flesh and the muscles off the bone, cooking it all down in a pot. Meanwhile, you're sitting up in a tree as a bird watching it. And they cook you down, and then they pull your skin out, and they pull your bones out, and they put it back together and pour it all in, and you come back awake again, a shaman to your tribe. So there's all of this death and resurrection story is built into the death card. So when people look at it, if they have ever in any lifetime had one of these intense initiations, it grabs them by that very content of their energy body and drags it up into consciousness. So you've had this experience maybe when you were young, that you're innocently, like a fool, toddling along through your life, having whatever's your moment-to-moment, private reality, which may be all spread out through all of nature. You might be having a lovely, blissful time listening to the birds and whatever, and suddenly something is played out in front of you. An eagle swoops down, grabs a fish, and flies off, and you see the death of the one becomes the resurrection of the other. You're watching it. The eagle is going to assimilate the fish. The fish story is over. The eagle's story goes forward, and that's the death card. That's one of the forms of the death card, and nature is full of this. So it's very civilized seeing the human skeleton reaping with an iron sickle, a scythe. That's really a product of human civilization meant to galvanize our human attention, but the body, the animal body, also sees all these other stories of death and rebirth built into that model from our Aboriginal and our DNA point of view. So it's a huge wake-up call for anybody who looks at it, and even people who are used to it. We have the death card, a tarot reader of 30, 40 years that I am. I've seen it millions of times in many decks for many situations, and yet when it comes up, it is the one place in the deck where you can't negotiate. You must go through the pruning. And anybody who has fruit trees or orchards also understands the pruner's hook.
Of course. Now, have you found it to mean or to have signified? Because there are points when the lovers mean lovers, when judgment means judgment, when the hermit means somebody is being in that fashion. I do truly believe. Have you ever found death meaning or signifying actual death in a read?
Yes, I have. One of my earliest readings. A little old lady came into my booth in 1974, 1975. She said to me, first, we just threw the cards out because she didn't want to say what her question was. And then the death card came up, and then she pointed to it, and she said, "That's my sister. I want to know if she's going to die before I do." And here I am, doing a reading that's usually 8 to 10 card or 11 card kind of a psychological thing. I'm thinking, here I'm 26 or something, and here's this lady asking me for a reading, and all she really wants to know is her sister going to die before her or not. And the death card comes up, and she read it herself. I would have never said that. I would not have said that.
But she went there.
She totally did.
Wow.
She just, as it came down, then that gave her permission to tell me what her question was. And after that, I realized, I'm not the only one reading these cards.
Yes, the sitter.
And I need to find cards that are not going to do damage to people psychologically.
The sitter is as much of the reader as the reader, I find, which is so interesting.
And some people really, really feel the need to actually confess everything. Other people who are more circumspect will, don't need to prime the pump with a bunch of questions. They'll just be happy to let me, interpret the cards. And I like that, too, because sometimes details just get in the way. I'm reading principle. And you were asking me, your question was, do you always take them at face value according to their surface meaning, or do you see them as having allegorical and metaphorical layers? And I would say yes to both things. It's not either or, because for each reading, I will go as far into the card as the person can go, and so I'll start with the obvious. But having made a deck myself and having been a collector all these years, the more you can texturize and open out the spaces inside the idea of the card, and so this is partially pictorially and partially I'm saying this from a point of view of being an occultist, the more ways you can load that imaginative space with symbolism and hints and color expression and some allegory on the picture, many different slants, even things that only show up when the card is upside down, that helps the reader take a hold of the simple facts of the card and open it out so that it really, each card becomes a world.
Amazingly just introspective. The work I think that you've done with tarot is I'm in awe just listening to you speak about it here tonight, Christine. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to bring us back up to the surface a little bit because of course we've only got a very short period of time here left, and I feel like we've gone deep and sort of down one pathway. But let's talk a little bit about the art of tarot when we return here tonight on Paranormal. My name is Jeff Richards. This is News Talk 980 CJME and News Talk 650 CKOM. TarotUniversity.com is Christine Payne-Towler's website. Now, Christine, you have developed a tarot deck yourself, the Tarot of the Holy Light, which from what I can see, it looks absolutely just a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous deck. Now, there's something to be said for the artwork on these cards. I collect decks as well. I've probably got 25 decks in my possession. One of my favorite artists is a guy by the name of Tiro Marchetti, who does some wonderful electronic media-based artwork that he puts together that's really interesting. But the artwork on I believe this Tarot of the Holy Light, it looks like it's stunning, but it's simple, and I really like that. How did you come up with the look of this deck?
Well, actually, my husband, Michael Dowers, did it, and what he did was, when we first got together, I showed him my collection of Alchemy books, which are all filled with these wonderful engravings, black and white engravings from the 16th and early 1700s. And I said, don't these look like tarot cards on steroids? Like the cards of the tarot just got up and they're walking around in these images and they're doing things and they're having all these interrelationships and mutating and turning in and out of each other. And he just said, and carried the books home and started hacking. So these are collages of the artworks of the alchemists of the 1600s. And focused around the work of the school of Jakob Boehm, Berman, different people say it different ways, Beam, depending upon where you're from. But it's written into the literature of the Masons and the Rosicrucians, later the Martinists, for 2-3 centuries afterwards, because he really is the exemplar of Kabbalistic alchemy with a Paracelsian foundation. So basically a pinnacle of Illuminism at the time of the Enlightenment, right as we were going through the Copernican revolution. And understand that the terms that we now have hashed out a whole bunch of terms that we consider scientific, and we try and hold those separate from the terms that we call theological. But in fact, up until this Copernican turn, the terminology of theology was the terminology of science. And there was a thing called nominalism that cut through all of the educational modalities, because the church had such a strong franchise on everybody's mind. They basically said, you cannot know the will of God when God created this world. Yes, this world is the manifested speech of God. But don't you presume that you know God's motive. What you know is God's effect. So you scientists, you can study the effects as you see them here in the world, but don't be trying to second-guess the divine motive. That's the priestly vocation, and we're doing that over here. So this separation of church and state was hard to keep at the beginning because the vocabulary was completely shared, and you see that now. You see the physicists all the way around the circle and coming back from the opposite direction, borrowing the terminology of the mystics. So there is something going on between the left hand and the right hand, and I've been trying to stare at this for the longest time, and I really think by the time I got to making this tarot deck with Michael that I got it kind of square in my mind that the astronomical sciences and the mathematical grid and all of the operations of sacred geometry are the hard science, and then we have this whole body of soft science that attaches to it that becomes religion, Kabbalah, alchemy, Hermeticism, and all the other isms that trickle out to the people in mystical terms.
Is your deck your favorite deck, Christine?
It is a compilation of my favorite decks, which are the French school decks and which go back to the original Marseille, as I've said before, taking the bare bones outline of the tarot, before it got all colored and pictured, before people drew all over it lots of different ways, before people started contending over what does the number one mean, when everybody was still in the same tradition. The Tarot of the Holy Light is my picture of what that is, and I can validate it because, like I said, Jacob Boehm and the circle around him, he had a bunch of illuminators, illustrators, and printers around him, and he was thinking architectonically, he was thinking geometrically. So he was using all these ancient arts that you could see with Flood and Kircher and all these other artists doing all this amazing stuff, bringing forth the mysteries of older civilizations. He was pulling all that together to illustrate the mysticism that he was feeling inside of himself as a student of the Old and New Testament. So I have a agenda with this deck to plant my stake around 1600 with Jacob Boehm because I can defend all the decisions I made based on his art and his writing.
And I think I know personally what I love about this deck that you've created, this Holy Lights Tarot. When I look at the imagery of the Fool, it reminds me a lot of a deck that I use. I use an oracle deck called the Oracle of the Radiant Sun, which is, again, it's a blend of a lot of the same types of things that you've blended within your cards, old woodcuts and a lot of this old, geometry and these old symbols, and it works with the zodiac, it works with the planetary houses, it works with all of that. But I look at the Fool and I see the Fool, and I feel like I've seen this Fool before. It's familiar to me, and I think that's what I love about it.
Oh, good. Yeah, it is. This is art that's familiar to all of us, both because it's in our cultural history as Western esotericism and has been used quite a lot by those who've come forward and are continuing to talk about these things, but also because these are distillations of things that happen to us in the psychic, emotional, and dream world of our aboriginal, pre-linguistic, animal, vegetable, mineral self. These things talk to the continuity in us that goes across multiple lifetimes. Now, it totally bypasses, the pictures bypass the logic circuit.
Now, I understand that the Holy Light deck is sold out presently?
We are right in between. We actually have to fix the website. We just got the new printing, and so as soon as I can get the pictures up there and have it repriced, I will announce it. We have a web page for it at Facebook, and then, of course, the buy page is at tarotuniversity.com. So I suppose if any listeners from this show tonight want to go over there and buy a deck at the old price, I will let them.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful! I will post a link on our Facebook page, facebook.com/talkparanormal, to your brilliant website, your tarot arc letters, the community that you've put together as well. I've talked to a lot of individuals about tarot on this program, and I think that the connection that you have with the decks and the way that you've delved so far into the history. You're a historian of the tarot, Christine, and I thank you so much for your time tonight.
It's been great. Thank you for bringing me on.
I want to have you back to talk about clairvoyance and your journey, your clairvoyant journey. Would you be willing to come back in the future to discuss that?
I would love it.
Fantastic. TarotUniversity.com is Christine Towler's website. You can find the deck that she was talking about tonight and the deck that I love so much right there on the main page, and as well the Facebook page will have the link to that for us here tonight. My name is Jeff Richards. This is Paranormal. We unfortunately are all out of time. We will be joined next week with another great list of guests. It's been a fantastic night. Big thanks again to Melissa Pyle, to Christine Payne-Towler, and of course to the production staff here at Rolco Radio for putting this show together. My name is Jeff Richards. This is Paranormal. You've been listening to News Talk 980 CJME and News Talk 650 CKOM.